Welcome, everyone. My name is Adam Sandman. I'll be the presenter today, and we're going to be talking about test automation, how to make it rapid and easy using Rapise. And so let's get started. First of all, for those who are new to the company, I just wanted to give a bit of context. This is the Inflectra platform, or the Inflectra suite, which contains a variety of different products. We have our test management, requirements management, and project management portfolio offering called Spira that consists of Spira Test, Spira Team, and Spira Plan. I did a webinar for that. I think it was at the end of last year. We're doing additional webinars in the coming weeks on the different family members of the family. So if you want to learn more about Spira Test, Team, or Plan, you can attend one of those webinars coming up. I will be briefly showing Spira during the demonstration because Rapise, which is our test automation tool, which is the focus of today's session, that does integrate and uses Spira to store its test assets. So you will be seeing that a small part of it as part of the demo. But today's focus is really on test automation, which is our Rapise product down at the bottom. And Rapise is able to test different kinds of application. I'll be going through some of those in the next slides, but it's basically a test automation tool, and it can also do process automation or RPA as well. So we have clients using it for both test automation and RPA use cases. Okay, so let's talk about Rapise, and we've got the top features, or the top 10 features of why you should use Rapise, or why Rapise is a great tool. First of all, and why maybe when using other tools, you may run into issues that Rapise has figured out. First thing is Rapise is a codeless automation tool, not just a framework. So one of the challenges we see from a lot of clients is that they have to maintain a framework. So someone comes along, builds a great framework using JavaScript or Java or .NET or Python, and it's a great framework. It's all in their head. They love it. And then as soon as they move on to some other project or leave the company, it's someone else's problem, and their maintenance becomes a nightmare. And we see this all the time. People are coming all the time to us with, we built this automation framework. It's unmaintainable. How do we keep it running now that the inventor has moved on or gone? And so that is a huge challenge with test automation in general. And Rapise makes this much easier because, first of all, it's codeless. So it reduces the barriers to entry to actually having the skills to do test automation. It makes maintenance much easier by a business user, but also it's a tool supported by a vendor. So we're here to help you out, and we can train your users. We've got training videos. So when people move on to different careers or different places in the company, we've got your back to help you maintain the test automation. And it comes with some nice features to make maintenance easier, including self-healing tests and smart locators. The second thing with test automation is, making sure it can cover all the applications that you need, because you may have lots of different applications that you'll be testing. And do you want to have a separate framework or a separate application for every single app you're testing? Do you want to have your teams having to learn a tool for web, a tool for desktop, a tool for mobile? Maybe you're going to be testing a complex web app that has, we'll see some of these like Salesforce, Shadow DOM, and you could use a separate tool just for those. Or do you want to have one platform where you can use it for a bunch of different technologies? And that way you can actually learn one tool, maintain one tool, have training on it, and then you can use it across a variety of different applications. And as people come to different applications, they bring it to us. We extend our support for those applications from our users' feedback and suggestions. Number 3 would be, it's all very well to have the testing set up, but how are you going to manage the testing and run those tests once they've been created? So Rapise has integration with the Spira test management tool, and I'll be showing you a little bit of that today in the webinar. And that simplifies the actual execution and tracking and reporting of testing versus having to build a custom solution. We've seen clients where they'll build something using a Git repository, they'll get some batch scripts, they'll get some pipelines, they'll get some reporting tool they built together using some open source frameworks. And you can do obviously a lot of this yourself, but you've got to build and maintain that. And again, when that person moves on, it all goes away. So when you need enterprise reporting and distributed testing and the ability to do that at scale, Spira Test together with Rapise gives you that out of the box. Number 4, when you've got business users in particular who want to be able to build tests, you don't necessarily want to have a programmer or an automation engineer, building simple scripts where you're recording tests, verifying actions, verifying data on the screen. Rapise does that very simply without a lot of formal automation experience. But when you do have more experienced people on the team, it doesn't frustrate them because they can also extend with code when they need. So it gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you the ability to have a codeless framework, which for simple test automation, a business user could do. But once you get into more complex scenarios, your automation engineers can extend what they're doing with code, with more complex automation scenarios with frameworks, reusability, building an automation framework that's going to basically be maintainable as opposed to just a bunch of recorded scripts. So it gives you the best of both worlds. Of course, you have to run in different browsers. We can support different browsers, different mobile devices. We can support both physical devices. So I'm going to be showing you today scripts running on my physical machine just for ease of demonstration using Chrome and Firefox. We also support IE, Edge, Safari, and Opera. But you can use virtual devices. So it could be Browser Stack or Cobaton or one of the, or Source Labs, one of the device farms that, which again exist. You can use those. If you've got an in-house device network using Selenium, Grid, or Appium, you can use that. If you want to use a physical device, you can even plug it into your machine, or you can use a cloud-based device for the mobile testing as well. Number 7, we try in Rapise separating the test and the test scenario from the objects in the application. So you can basically build a test scenario with different actions and different operations, and then the objects that you're interacting with, so these will be the buttons, the grids, the different UI elements, and also API elements, they're separated out from the test script. So that way, when you have to record a script or modify a script, you can easily remap the objects to when they've changed. And B, those objects can be shared across different test scripts. So you don't have to record everything every single time. You can have a library of common elements that then different tests can use. And we have an object manager that makes that really easy as well. Number 8, when you have to modify things, both modifying the script is really easy. You can just use the table editor that you can see right here. You can record parts of a script and update it in line. And if you have to remap an object, you can use the relearn feature to simply flash it to see if it exists still, relearn it if it doesn't. Number 9, as well as UI testing, which is the focus of Rapise, it is primarily a UI testing tool. It does have API support, so it can send REST requests, it can send SOAP requests, and can verify the data back. And this is really useful when you want to do a combined API UI test. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, there's a couple of different options. One is you might be getting test data from an API that you want to then use to test user interface. So that's a common use case. Another possibility is for an RPA, where you're moving data from one system to another. One system has an API, one system doesn't. You get the data from the API from one system, and you use RPA to put the data into the other system through its UI. A third use case would be you want to test a complex AJAX app, and you're going to be testing the service layer and the UI rendered layer on top of the what's data coming back from the web service. So the web service sends you data, and like a React control is then going to render that onto a grid. Well, you could test the grid, which is great. You also might want to test the UI and test the data coming back from the UI before it gets rendered. So you can have more complex scenarios like that with different support for different layers in the stack. And 10, as I mentioned earlier on when we talked about distributed testing, people always want to know what's going on in real time. So the integration with Spyro gives you that real-time enterprise reporting across all the different test activities that you're doing. And you can tie those automated scripts back to your requirements for requirements test coverage as part of your quality metrics. So that's the, before we get into the demo, just to mention of some of the platforms as well as the features, we have robust support for all the major web platforms. We can do the different browsers that I mentioned, i.e. Edge, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. You can record in one, play back in the other. That's an example of Dynamics 365 that you can see there. We can do mobile apps, both physical and virtual, both native and mobile web, iOS and Android. For desktop apps, which still make up a large part of the testing service that people are doing, we can test Windows apps, we can test Java apps, Swing, Qt, .NET, AWT, SWT. We can also do Oracle Forms, Oracle Fusion, Oracle ERP. We've also got support for some of the common components. We can also do hybrid apps. So we've got some clients that we're looking at effectively embedded browsers where you have, it's like Microsoft Teams does this. It's a desktop app, but inside it is the Chromium browser running in a browser in a desktop container. A lot of testing tools can't talk to the browser inside the desktop container. Rapise can do that as well. We can also, because we have desktop and web, we can even test some things where you're going to be like downloading a file from a browser and you're actually using the browser functions, not the web app functions, and then uploading. So we can do some of those use cases that you can't do in some of the pure browser testing tools as well. As I mentioned, we do have the support for web services, both REST and SOAP. This is just a sample form. And of course, we do have a lot of users that are using these large applications. The common ones will be Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, Oracle, and SAP. And we have built-in specialized support for those applications. During today's demo, I won't be showing those. That will be the focus of a separate demo. Each one of those takes a while to set up and build the test data for. But Rapise has built-in libraries that handle Salesforce, different flavors of Dynamics, CRM, Dynamics ERP, AX and Nav, as well as Salesforce Lightning and Classic, ServiceNow, and also the web components SAP. And in 2023, we'll be adding support for SAP GUI as well, which is sort of the last piece of the puzzle, as it were. And of course, not as common, but still useful occasionally. Sadly, a lot of apps are still terminal mainframe apps. When you hear about airline reservation systems going down or banking applications going down, in many cases, they are still using AS400 or other terminal-based applications. These apps were built in the 70s using COBOL, but they work and they're doing critical applications. Rapise can connect to a terminal emulator. We've got some different examples of those, Java and Windows based typically, and we can then automate the interacting of data and the reading of the text from a terminal app. So those are some of the different types of application that we can test. I'm going to move into the live demo. For today's demonstration, I'll be focusing primarily on desktop and web, because those are the easiest to show on a webinar. If there's interest, again, put it into the chat or the questions of things you'd like to see in the future. We could do a separate webinar focusing on some of the enterprise apps. If you wanted to see Salesforce or Oracle or Dynamics, if you wanted to see another mobile, that's usually a separate demo because of the setup, and we have to set up different environments to show all that. So we can show mobile as well. So again, let us know if there's any specific use cases that you'd like to see in a live application. Rapise can test all of those, but for today's demonstration, I'll be focusing on web and desktop just to give you a flavor for the tool. I'll also be showing you how we integrate with Spira, how we can get the reporting back into Spira. Okay, and I will also warn you right now, as the demo effect, this is a live application. Things can go wrong. If things don't work, that's normal. That's test automation. So we may see things not always work exactly as we want them. That will be the good old demo effect because it is live. The perils of live TV. So with that, I'm going to move now into Rapise over here. This is our Rapise application. And basically, you can use Rapise completely standalone, but it does have really nice integration with Spira. And so, for example, when you first open it up, you have this start page. We have got some built-in help and webinars that we've pre-recorded that we can point you to. So if you are starting to use it for the first time, feel free to use one of the webinar links, use the tutorials. There's inline documentation, both inside Rapise. If you F1, it will always bring up context-sensitive help. Or if you go to our Rapise doc website, on a second, go away Zoom, move it. There we go. The Rapise doc website is a great resource. It contains all the release notes, libraries, manuals, everything that you see is here. When you access it from within Rapise using F1, it will also launch this site into the right place. And we'll do that a bit later on. Okay, the other thing that I mentioned is the integration with Spira. So we have a Spira dashboard inside Rapise. This gives you access to the test management functionality inside of Rapise natively, so you don't have to go between Rapise here and Spira in the browser over here. You can obviously do that, but we do have it inside Rapise. So you can look at the different projects. This is where you'll be storing all your test information. You've got graphs and charts and the ability to manage test cases and view them directly inside of Rapise. So we have a really seamless integration between the two parts of our platform. Spira is completely web-based. Rapise is the desktop designer tool. Okay, so enough talking. Let's go ahead and do some actual automation. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and first of all create a new test. And because I'm hooked up to Spira, it is going to try and save it in Spira. You could also save it locally. So I don't want to save what I was working on. That was just something I was messing about with. So let's go ahead and create a new regression test. So we've got a folder called regression tests. Under that, we've got demo tests. Let's create a new folder called webinar tests. Okay, there's our webinar test folder. I'm going to create a new test case, simple web test 1 for today's demonstration. And please feel free to write any questions you have in the Q&A. What I'll do is I'll go through the basic web test and desktop test. I'll show the integration with Spira, and then I'll be coming to the Q&A. Okay, we've created a simple test. And now I've got the option of what kind of test is it. Now, although I gave it the name web, the system doesn't know it's web, so I need to tell it that it's web. If you choose web, it's going to load the browser libraries. If you choose mobile, it loads in the mobile libraries. If you choose desktop, it's going to give you the option to pick the different libraries for the kind of application. And then there's also option for manual. Manual is a bit out of scope for today's demonstration. Manual is a useful utility where Rapise, instead of creating automated scripts, it can create manual scripts. That's useful if you've got an application that really is not a good candidate for test automation for whatever reason. Maybe the technology is not supported, or maybe it's just too complicated and not stable enough yet. Manual would let you record a manual script, and it builds out the test case with the screenshots and images and text as you're clicking through it. So it's kind of like a test documentation tool or a manual test case creation tool. So there's a useful reason for that, but that's what manual is. So that's not typically used in automated projects, but it's a useful way of using Rapise to do something different. And if it's interested in that, I can even show that in another demo on another time. All right, but let's start with web. I'm going to be recording in Chrome, and I'll be playing it back in Chrome and Firefox. So we'll do Selenium Chrome. The different browser libraries are all here. We support all the major browser libraries using Selenium. Okay. And inside of Rapise, you can customize using the Selenium Profile Manager the different profiles. So if you've got a local Chrome versus Selenium Grid on a remote network or browser stack, each one has its own profile that you can then point to, and you can change in this drop down at the top right that you see. You can change which particular browser you're playing back or recording through. But anyway, we'll come back to that in a minute. The last choice you have is, am I going to be using the codeless interface or the JavaScript code-based? If you use codeless, which is what I'll do today, you can still use JavaScript for writing functions and exposing it to the codeless interface. So that's the most flexible. JavaScript means it's all going to be in code. So let's go ahead and do codeless. So we have right here a very simple empty test. There's a set of there's a grid, a set of steps that will be created there as we do our recording. On the left-hand side is the file explorer. That's not so useful. I actually want to switch to the object tree. That's going to give me access to all the objects that I record. And an object in this context will be a UI element, button, grid, list, table, drop down, that kind of thing. If it's an API test, it would be an API endpoint. But notice that there's also these global objects that you see here. These are global utility objects that don't require prior recording. These are available right away. These are useful if you wanted to, for example, read data from a database, read things from a file. We've got the ability to extract things from a PDF and so on, and write to and from files. There's some utility objects here where you can kill processes, launch an application if it's a desktop app. You can do things like waiting for certain amounts of time. A lot of good utility functions are there. We've got a spreadsheet editor built in, so we can extract data from a spreadsheet for test data. We've also got some testing functions if you want to do assertions. This will be done automatically when we actually verify things using the record module, but you can always add your own assertions later. And there's also options for manipulating text, interacting with Spira if you want to create defects programmatically when a test fails. And there's some also test data generation tools and other tools specific to browsers or mobile. If you're using a browser test, you'll get Navigator. That's a browser utility. If we're using mobile, we would have a mobile utility where you can do things like simulate shaking of the phone. So there's lots of really neat functions available here in the global objects. They're all in the documentation. To get more information, you could just click on it, expand it, choose the option, hit F1, and it brings up the context sensitive help, and you can now see exactly what that function does. Okay. That's a little overview of what you're seeing. Let's go ahead and do the recording. So let's go ahead and record a simple test. I've got Selenium Chrome set up, and I'm going to be testing this sample application that we call Library Information System. When you record using Chrome, it should launch a new separate browser window that's being automated. Let's go ahead and do that. So it's going to fire up Chrome. All right. And there's the URL to start recording. It knows that URL because I did that the last time. You enter the URL right here, and that's the URL you'll be recording at. Okay. Okay, this is my application. I'm just going to maximize it. Now, before I do anything, let me explain what you're seeing. On the main screen, you're seeing obviously the browser window. On the bottom right, you're seeing the recorder. This is going to record my interactions. There's two main modes we have within Rapise. There's recording and there's learning. So for simple test automation scenarios where you're basically logging in, going to do something simple, create some data, verify it, something that a business user is going to do. You can use recording. It's really good for those kind of simple scenarios. For anyone who's done a lot of test automation, you may know that obviously over time, when you're doing a lot of complex scenarios, recording is not always the best approach. You want to build more of a framework, make it more reusable, maintainable. To do that, you'll use the learn option instead. Learn object lets you grab objects and put them into your object repository, and then you can build the test that way. I'll show you both options, but let's just start with the recording. So let's go ahead and log in. And I notice it's going to be recording my actions on the bottom right as I do them. It may bring up a password manager. It might not. It doesn't. That's good. Librarian. And the password is the same. This is a sample application that you can use at home. It's publicly hosted. I'm going to log in. And now I want to verify that I logged in. So I'm going to use this verify option. I usually use the keystroke because it's more convenient to move the mouse over and do Control and 1. So it'll pop up the verification, text. You could do bitmap as well. And let's go ahead and create a book. So click on book management, create a book, and you can see down here what's going on. You can always go in here and you can edit actions if you want to change something. I don't really want to do that right now, but if you wanted to, you can do that. If you click on something by mistake and you want to get rid of it, you can remove irrelevant actions as well. So I'll create a new book, Adam's book. Genre is historical fiction. I'm going to insert that. Let's go ahead and verify that I did that correctly with Control and 1. Let's do the text of that too. Text, hit OK. Let's log out, get back to my starting point. So clean up, hit finish. And that's a simple test, very easy to record. Business user could do that, hit append, and now you've got a script. And I call it a script, but it's really a scenario because there's no code. What you can see here is a series of actions. So anything that's an operation is typically one line. If it's an action where it's got more than one parameter, it might be more than one line. Most are usually one. Some actions like logging in and clicking are just simple click, click. When you've got some data, like entering text, you would see the object name, which is the username box. You'll see the action, which is to set the text. And you'll now have a parameter value, which is to put the value into that. So this is what it's recorded. Now you may wonder, and also, sorry, when you verify something, it does create 4 lines right here. It creates the assertion, which is the message display if it matches or doesn't match. Let me make that a little bigger. You'll also see the action. It's going to basically get the text of the librarian little text box, and it's going to compare that output of that with the parameter, and parameter 2 is the value that we're hoping to match it. So what this is saying is verify that whatever's in that box that was called librarian, which is the login name, make sure the text is the word librarian. And if you wonder where these objects come from, they come from the left-hand side. The global objects, I'm going to hide those. Under the window names, we have the actual objects that you see here. And although it's called librarian, it's basically a pointer to the login, the name of the person who's logged in. So you could decide to rename that something else and make it sort of librarian. You could make it login name and then change it here. So, and another thing is now, how do you change this script? Well, it's very easy. It's always a series of drop downs and menus. So if I wanted to, for example, add an item, let's say I wanted to click on something that I didn't record, I can go to here in the object tree, expand the menu, see all the operations. If I don't know what they do, I can click on one and do F1 like I did before. I can then drag that down here to the test grid, let go, and now I've got a test action. If I want to comment it out because it's not good, I can comment it out like that. I can uncomment it out like that very easily. I'll just actually, let me show it commented out properly. There you go. It goes green. That means it's not going to be acted on. So easy to comment things out and try them out. And if you want to change the operation, you can go to the drop down. So instead of clicking on the login, I want to double click. Maybe I want to do something else. I want to make sure it's visible on the screen. Maybe I want to hold the left button down, hold the left button up. So you can simulate different operations, all available right here. If I want to choose a different object, I don't have to drag it. I could also do it from here. And this will show me every object you see in the object tree. So I can change it right there as well, and then change the operation. So again, it's very easy to modify the script, make changes, to delete things. You can right click and do delete. So before we go any further, I'm going to play that to make sure it works. And then I'm going to show you a few other things we can do. But first of all, let's go ahead and play that. So to play that, again, the zoom window seems to always be right where I don't want it, back up the top. So I'm going to go play the test, and it should go back in here in Chrome and play. And it's doing the playback right now. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, that worked. We can also get screenshot capture. I will show you that when we do the Spira test integration part, but that's how easy it is to record a simple script and play it back. And make sure you write your questions in the Q&A or the chat window. I think Q&A is preferred. If you have written in the chat, don't worry, we will answer them there too, but the Q&A is the main one. So again, we'll come back to the Q&A after I've gone through some of the main scenarios first, but don't worry, we will get to your questions. The next thing I want to show you before we do that, though, is how we play it back in a different browser. To do that, it's really easy. Go in here, change the browser. Make sure now you have to make sure you configure these correctly. Typically, you just install Rapise and it will find the browser. Sometimes you have to point it at where your browser is installed if it's at a different location to normal. I had to do that before the demo, so I want to play it back in Firefox. Let's hope that works. And hit the play button, and it should now launch Firefox. Now that's Chrome, so it won't be there. It should hopefully fire up Firefox. Now I do have Firefox running, but it won't use that. It will use a separate Firefox that's being controlled by the browser, by the Rapise, sorry. And that's one thing to note. Most of the browsers nowadays, for security reasons, when they're being controlled by a tool like Rapise, they do display that in a certain way. Like in Firefox, you'll see you've got this pinky, orangey, salmony color URL bar with a little robot icon. That means it's telling you that it's being controlled by a third-party app. And in Chrome, it will do the same thing. It says Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. So that's really important. So it plays back in a dedicated window, and that's for security reasons. All the major browsers are now basically forcing that model. Okay, so that's how we would play back the same test on two different browsers. And if you wanted to play it back on multiple browsers, you can use Spira test to send different test parameters through. But before we do that, let's go ahead and talk about how we would save that to Spira test and have it run from a test management tool and get that beautiful reporting and screenshots, because that's a nice thing to have. So what I did is I ran this test on two different browsers, and I ran it completely locally by hitting the play button. That's great when you're writing tests, but typically what you want to do is have them be stored somewhere, and then you're going to execute them overnight and come back and they're all finished and have control over that. And also, when this test passes or fails, have a permanent record of that from an audit standpoint. So to do that, what you'll need to do is, first of all, save it back to Spira. So I'm saving this to Spira, and it's going to upload it to Spira. Spira acts as the document repository. It can either store it in its native document repository, or it can use an integrated Git repo. That's really up to you. In either model, Spira will act as the version control system for Rapise. And if I now go over here into my Firefox, this is now back in my native real Firefox window. This is where Spira is running. If I go into the project I was working on, which was a library information system, if I go in here and I choose the test case section, you will see that down here, we have a new folder, hopefully, called webinar tests under regression. So let's go into the root. I'm going to go into regression, into webinar, and there's my webinar test I just created. If I click on it, you will see that inside of Spira, we have the name of the test. There's no description. There's no steps because it's not a manual test. If you want to have steps that was based on, you could do those here. And then down here is the automation section. And that points to a location inside of Spira where we're storing the test information. Now, if you wanted to parameterize this test and have Spira pass through like the browser name, so you can run on different browsers or different test data, you can do that here. You define the input parameters right here. Then Spira will populate those, and they get passed to Rapise as input parameters. And that's one, again, another really nice feature of using it with Spira. You can also call Rapise from the command line, or Jenkins, or ADO, or any other pipeline that you might be using, and do something very similar as well. All right, let's go ahead though and talk about the scheduling. So let's go ahead and run that test that we just created. Let's go to test sets. And as I said, this is not a Spira test demonstrational webinar, so I'm not going to spend too much time on Spira. If you want to see that, there's a webinar coming up, I think, in a week or two's time. But let's go ahead and create a simple test set just to run it. So we'll go simple automation script. And in real life, I'd probably want to have more than one test in a suite that I'm running. I'm just doing one right now. So let's go ahead in here, and let's go ahead and have Spira run this automatically. So I go into test cases. I grab my test case from my webinar folder. I only have the one, hit save. and choose the release I'm going to run it on. Release 1 of my library information system. I choose the machine. My machine is called TARDIS because I'm a Doctor Who fan. And if you go into the plan date, I want to run it right now. There is the option to run it based on a build. If you do that, it's going to be triggered by a pipeline like Jenkins or GitLab or GitHub or something like that. So we have that option as well. So I've scheduled my test. It's ready to go. What needs to happen next? The last thing I'll do is I am going to close down Rapise because we don't need that. We have a special launching tool. And one of the things that's important is that our launching tool, which we call Rapise Launcher, is completely free. So if you are using Spira with Rapise, you don't need to buy execution licenses like some of our competitors. You can just simply use the free Rapise Launcher and it will run the test automatically for you and doesn't require a license. So we only charge for the editing tool, which is the tool that we use to write the tests. So it's just found my test. It's going to start running it, and it should hopefully run it over here in Chrome if I've got it right. So let's see what happens. And it will look very similar to last time. It's just going to run it in Chrome. Hopefully you can see that okay. So to the outward user, it looks identical to last time. The difference is now it is being run remotely from Spira, and it will report back to Spira, which it didn't do the last time. All right, that's finished. I'm going to close my browser windows down that I'm using for running the tests. I'm going to close Launcher down altogether because we don't need that anymore, for at least for today's demo. So close that. Exit out of it. And I'm going to Spira, hit the refresh button, and you'll see it's completed, it's passed. If we go to the test run section, we'll see a new test run. And you can see right here in Spira, we've got the results, screenshots, and embedded steps. So you can see exactly what happened with screenshots click by click. And in this case, the test passed. That's also going to then show up in the graphs and charts. If you go into the test run section, you would see on the left-hand side this little miniature graph that shows you all the runs. If you go into the reporting section, you've got a lot more graphs and charts where you can see the results over time, what's going on. Now, obviously, this is a demo system. We're not doing a ton of testing. It's for demos, so it won't show too much data, but you can see, yeah, there's the pass from today. And if we go to test run progress, you'll see probably today's run. If I do that this week, update, or maybe this month. Anyways, you'll see the different runs in here. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So there you can see the different runs that we've been doing for the demos. Okay, so that's some of the benefits of using it with Spira. Now, if we go back into Rapise itself, let's talk about some of the other features that we haven't yet gone through. First of all, before we move into desktop apps, let's finish up web apps. So I've shown you how you can record a simple test. In this case, I was just recording a creating of a book, but I might want to be testing the application and I might want to do a lot more changes. I might not want to record every single thing by using record and play. I might want to edit my test and just build it myself. So how would I do that? So if I go back to the RBL view, let's say I want to add some additional actions. So I can just drag and drop these objects, but how do I get these objects in the first place? What you'll do though is use record, and it's going to fire up Chrome again. So I probably shouldn't have closed it, but that's okay. There we go. It's going to bring up the URL. Yep. Okay, great. And instead of now recording, I'm going to use the learn option, Control and 2. When I use Control and 2, it's a way to quickly grab objects from the page. I'm just doing it by hovering the mouse. As you can see, it's really, really quick, much faster than recording. And I've got all my objects learned. Hit finish. Go back to Rapise. And if I go append, there's actually no script, so nothing really needs to be there. I'll just get rid of that. That was opening the browser up. We don't need that. And if you go to the left-hand side there, you'll see we've got a whole bunch more objects than we had a minute ago. And if I want to now click on the Rapise icon, I can just go in here and go click. I want to click on the Inflectra icon, click. So now I can build my test this way. I don't have to record anything. I can just learn objects. I can then interact with them using the left-hand side objects and putting them into the test grid. So that's how you would build a scenario using the codeless interface. How do we do things like data-driven testing? Now that's easy as well because we have a table editor. Now what you can do is you would typically, the easiest way is to create what's called a map. So if we go in here, we'll create a map, and our codeless interface lets you create both loops and branches without any code. So let's create this new map, and we'll call it a row map. You can do a column map as well. And let's imagine we're going to basically run the same test through multiple books and multiple logins. So we'll call it users and books. And just do a couple of examples. So we'll have the login name, the password, and we'll have the book name. Now you could do the author as well, the genre of the author, whatever else you need. I'm just going to get rid of these additional columns I don't need. And this test there doesn't have to be embedded here. It can be in a separate sheet. It can be an external spreadsheet. It can be a database. It can be a web service. There's lots of different places we can get the data from. I'll just do admin, librarian, borrower, and maybe the password is, password 123. Hopefully it's not for the admin. Change me, and I don't know, borrower. And the book name might be, my brain is not in a creative mode, so I'm just going to do book 1, 2, book 3, like that, but you get the idea. And now if I wanted to then loop my test through, I pick the section of the test I want to iterate, which is this section here, and I say wrap the section in a loop. I say use my map. I've only got one map, but there could be more than one, and that's not quite it. The last step is I have to remap these fixed strings to the variables. So it's easy enough. You go in here, you change it from string to the map, and change that to login. Same thing here with password. And the same thing with book name. And you do it in the verify as well, which I haven't done. So again, imagine I did that. So, and the zoom window is yet again in the way. So let's move it out of the way. There we go. And like that. So now I've taken my hard-coded test and made it a data-driven test. And that took about maybe 1 minute, 30 seconds a minute. Very easy to do. So that's how you would do things like data-driven testing completely codeless. There's also the option to wrap things in if-then statements. If you want to do branching conditions, you can do that here. Very easy. And if you want to play a section, you can do it right here as well. So if I want to just play the login sequence, because sometimes when you're doing testing, I want to log in and then learn more objects. Well, I'm lazy. I don't want to have to log in by hand. That's a lot of work. I could just go in here and literally go right click, play this section. It logs me in, and I can do my recording. So it's very useful just from a productivity standpoint. Now, but you might be thinking like, well, that's great, but I'm a programmer. I don't want to do if-thens in this table. I want to do it in code. How would I do that? Very easy. You can write functions directly in JavaScript. You can go to the user file, and that's always available. You write your functions here. But if you want to take something you've already learned in codeless and convert it to code, you can do that as well. All you need to do is to go right click, copy selection as JavaScript, and you just paste it in, and it's now converted it into JavaScript. We don't need that first line. And if you want to then use JavaScript, you can still do the same thing and drag things from here, from the side. So you can drag things from the left-hand side, whether it's codeless or code. And we have the advantage of code is we do have a debugger as well. So if you want to do more advanced debugging, you can put things in code. And then if you want to then have this be executed, all you do is you wrap it with a containing function. So let's say this is the login function, login to system. And you can then pass the parameters. So you'd have like login password, because you see those are defined here. So you need to make those input parameters, because otherwise it's going to complain that those aren't defined. You save that. Once it's saved, you can then call it from within the function. So you go to action, and you would go to functions. Where are they? F for functions, functions. Oh, no, generator, sorry, functions. And then under there, you would see the login to system, hit enter. And now you've got your login, which you can then pass from the map. Now I'm not inside the loop, but if I was inside the loop, I could then pass that from the variables, just like I was doing. So now you're combining code and no code. So you're getting basically sort of a low code. So the great thing is, from a collaboration standpoint, if you've got team members that are business users and you've got team members who are more technical, they can work on the same test. The technical users can write things in functions like this, and the business users can just call those functions and pass test data. So it really allows a lot of collaboration between different skill levels on the same team. Okay, so that's how you would do some of the data-driven testing. Before we move on to desktop apps, and I know we're running short of time, what about more complex web apps? I've shown how you record and learn, and you would say, well, I've got a complex app. It's got like a big grid, and it's got a very complex DOM. How do I interact with that? Because if I click learn, it might learn the wrong thing. So there are more advanced tools. If I go back into record, wait it to finish. Once it comes up, you've got the spy tools. So the spy tool lets you basically interact. I think this is, let me make sure this is live. So you can learn by just doing Control and 2. Yep, that learns that, but that's okay for this. But suppose I want to look at a grid. So let me log in. I'm going to pause the recorder so I can log in myself. So you can see if you want to pause recording, you can always do that. Easy and peasy. Okay, if I want to look at this grid, hit resume. Now I can then use the spy, and the spy will let me see what's behind the grid. So I can go in here and it loads the grid, and I can do Control T for tracking. Let's say I want to look at this. I want to look at this link. It's really useful. Can do Control T. It's now taking me into the app. I can see the DOM, and now if I want to learn this web object, I can double click on it. It shows me the XPath of how it finds it, and that's also where some of the intelligence comes in. Rapise has different options for learning XPath, and when it learns it and doing recording, you might want to wonder, why does it use this kind of XPath, not a different kind? Well, there's different rules built into Rapise, which lets it understand how to find a web app, how to find objects in the web app, and you can actually configure and train Rapise to actually learn the objects in different ways. So if you know that in your application, the ID is always transient, and every time you refresh the page, it changes, and that's a useless way to learn the link, then you could train Rapise to ignore that particular ID. Now, in this case, it actually is a great way of learning it because that ID is the business ID of a book. So if I'm learning that link, it would actually be the right link every time. So it's actually very valid, but it isn't always. And so Rapise can be adjusted to learn the objects in different ways that match your application, and that helps it be more resilient. But that's a bit more of an advanced topic that we're not going to go into too much today. But if I wanted to learn this object that I've now found in the spy tool, I can learn the object by hitting learn. And now it gets added to my learn window. And if I go to finish and go back to Rapise, it does exactly what it did before, and it allows me to add that to the object. So if I page. So if I go here, you'll see under the book management window, we've got this new edit link, and that is the link that I just found using the spy. So to recap, you can record and play, you can learn objects by just moving the mouse over and learning them, or you can use the spy tools to go more deep into the application. And that's useful for more tricky, complex apps. We do have spy tools for all of the different technologies. That was the web spy. We also have it for desktop and mobile, and Java flavor of desktop as well. So that's an overview of web applications. I'm now going to show you a little bit of desktop. Now, we don't have a ton of time, and I want to get to questions, so I'm not going to do as much in desktop, just show you the basics of how similar it is with a desktop app. And again, with a mobile app, it's also very similar. You have a little picture appears in Rapise with the phone, and you can record and play, and it learns objects. So desktop, web, mobile, all similar concepts. The locators and the technologies are different, but the UI and how you do all the testing and playing it back is identical. Okay, so let's do a quick desktop app. To do that, I'm going to create a new test. I'll put it into my regression folder under webinars. This one we're going to call new test case. We'll call it simple. Everything's simple, I guess. It's a webinar. Simple desktop app. Hit OK. Desktop now. So I choose desktop this time, not web. All right. We'll use RVL, visual language. Yep. And now I'm going to record. Now, this is my desktop app, and it truly is very simple. It's called Two Dialogues. It's a free sample that comes with Rapise, and I'm going to go record. So ignore Chrome in the background. We're not using that. Okay. Let me find my app. It's the Two Dialogues. There it is. Notice with desktop, there's a little more options. I'm going to use automatic, but if you go to libraries, there are different options here. If you know you're using, for example, Microsoft Dynamics, and that's a desktop app, you can't just use the regular desktop libraries. You should, well, you should, but you can, but you shouldn't. You should also use the AX libraries. Same thing with Nav. So make sure, and so on and so forth. And same for the if you're doing like SWT, or if you're going to we use one of these third-party libraries like Inflogistics or Syncfusion. If you're doing Java, make sure you add the Java. If you're doing Oracle Forms, that Oracle Forms. So there are different libraries that you need to enable for different desktop technologies, and it may require a little bit of playing around to get the right one. If you're not sure, our support team is always here to help you with their recommendations. This particular application is a very straightforward desktop app, so I don't need all of that. So I'll just choose automatic. It's now recording, and I'm going to now interact with this application. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to enter my name, Adam, and enter someone else's name, Teresa, and I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to verify the output. Thank you. Your name is Adam. OK, hit finish. And once it finishes, append. I've got the exact same thing I had before. I've got a script and objects. It looks identical, except if I was to go a little bit deeper, there's no XPath anymore. It's using a different set of location technologies. The objects and the parameters, the functions like the do set text, the commands you can do are a little bit different, but conceptually it's very similar. You can do everything I did before. You can create maps, you can create loops, you can do branching, you can use code, you can use low code. You can save it to Spiro, you can run it from Spiro, you can do reporting with screenshots. Everything else, apart from the fact that it's desktop, is the same. And the same thing is true of mobile. So it's really easy to use for all these different platforms. It's one skill set you need to do it. And again, if you wanted to find an object on the page, make sure it's there. You can do the same thing we would have done on web, which is to use Flash. So I'm just going to, hopefully, if I do that, bring that there and Flash, and then bring, it should then flash the object, hopefully, and pop up. There you go. So that way, it'll verify the objects on the page. And if you ever change your application, whether it's mobile or web or desktop, you can just do relearn, and that lets you remap the object. So with all of that, I think we've now got time for questions. So Teresa, if I can hand it over to you to ask what questions, and hopefully we can show them.
Yeah, thanks so much, Adam. That was a lightning session on testing with Rapise. So we do have a few questions here. Thank you so much for those that have submitted questions so far. If you're thinking of things, go ahead and ask them now. One question came from Mark. Can you run tests headless?
Yes, web tests, yes, and desktop apps typically not. For web tests, you can run them headless using the Selenium playback option. We integrate with different options like Night Watch. We also integrate with the Selenium grid, and it can even be run using the playback engine can be run using Node.js. And sorry, this isn't too technical. We can run the playback using Node.js, and so it can be run completely headless for any of the web apps. And I believe also mobile as well. Desktop apps typically not, because those do require access to the physical Windows desktop. Now, there are some limitations in headless mode. If you're using a browser and you want to do something where you're going to go and click around in the browser, you can do all of that headless. If you attempt to do something like print or file upload or download, things that mix web and actually the browser's functionality itself, like going to like the file print menu. Some clients want to do this stuff. Anything that's outside of the raw browser itself won't work headless. Anything that's inside the browser window in the web app itself can be done fully headless.
Excellent. We have a question from Carlos, and he was asking, in the example shown, do we need to install Selenium?
No. Well, not if you're running on the same machine. When you install Rapise, it detects all the browsers on your local machine, and it will install the Selenium libraries appropriate for your machine. Now, if you've got multiple versions of some of the browsers, like you've got Firefox installed in multiple places, it doesn't install on every single version of the browser. So we do have download links if you need to install it separately. But if you're just using the standard default browsers in the default locations, Rapise is smart enough to find them and automatically connect Selenium to them.
Awesome. Adam, I think you touched on this a little bit when you were demonstrating the spy tool, but Mark asked prior to that, how do objects get named when multiple similar objects are on the screen?
Oh, great question. By default, what Rapise will do, let me go back to the web app version. It's a little bit, there's more objects there. Open recent tests, hold on. Basically, it gives it a default name. The name is a pointer, so it doesn't matter too much. You can change it. Like, remember we had librarian, and I said at the time, and I didn't change it, librarian was the name of the login I actually used. It isn't the name of the login button, it's just a login link. So if I was to record that twice, it would, if it's the exact same XPath, it would actually know not to duplicate it. It will just use the same one. If, for example, it was a different login and somehow it didn't know exactly it was the same, or maybe the ID was two different ways of finding the same object, it might create librarian 1 and librarian 2. It automatically adds a number to make the name unique. But these names are not important. They're not the physical name on the screen. So if I wanted to rename this, I could go in here and call it, which it really should be like login name, because it isn't librarian. It just happens to be librarian at the time I recorded it. And so now I've changed the login name. And if you go back here, you would just have to remap this to the right name, because obviously that is no longer called librarian. You would go in here and remap it to login name like that. So they're basically, effectively, these are pointer names. They're aliases for what's on the physical screen. And if when you do record it, if it happens to find one that already exists, it will just suffix it with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to avoid collisions.
Excellent. So we have a couple of questions that are coming in about updating a test when
Yep.
the application changes.
Yeah.
So a more general question of that nature, but then also like specifics, like what if a specific button or drop-down menu is used in multiple tests? Is there a way to kind of update multiple test cases that are using that?
Right. So this is, yeah, fair amount to unpack. So first thing is, the first thing is you can always relearn something. So you go to this option here, you do relearn, and it will basically let you remap. I don't know if I have the right screen on, so it may not work now, but you can basically point it to, I should do like that. I can remap that object to the same object. So it's basically updated the reference. So that's the simple way of maintaining it. Now, that's not always the best way, because sometimes what you want to do is it's still here and it's been remapped. Now, the other thing you might want to do is avoiding that in the future will be when you first build the objects out, you'd ideally want things to be more maintainable, not as brittle. So one of the things about test automation in general is if I have to record it, and every time I change something, I have to relearn it, it will work, but it's not the most efficient way. So the one thing you would want to do, and this is the difference between, I think, the basic automation where I'm just recording and playing, which is great, especially if the application doesn't change much, that might be all you need. But where you're looking at applications that are evolving a lot more, to save time, it may be worth doing a bit more analysis, because what you can do in Rapise, which is really neat, is when it recorded that, it happened to use the ID, right? But if you remember when I went to the spy tool, it gave me different options. It doesn't have to be just that one. So you can tell Rapise to use different versions of that. We can use the text. So we have found in some cases that the different types of spy option will work better. So depending how you record it, think of it that way, you can make your system more or less prone to needing the maintenance in the first place. I'll come back to the multi-test question next, but I want to just show that because that is a really important feature. Is when you do the spy, there we go, and you go to that learn option. I'll just go to the same thing here, Control T. We've got more than one way of finding that. Here's some different options. Like, do we use the ID? Do we use the name? Do we use text? So depending on what that is, and different options will have different objects will have different options for what you can do. If I go to, say, the logout link, or let's say the edit button that we had before, there's different options again. So depending on the object, it will have different options. Now that's one level of, I think, maintenance improvement. The second thing that's a little more advanced is if you know your application has a problem where IDs are always random and they're never a good option, you can use what's called a web profile. And you can go here and you can do, if I go to files, you can do create web app profile. And I hope it's not too scary for people, but this is basically a way of telling Rapise when it records something, what's good and what's bad. Like in this case, it says IDs are good, but exclude them if they're just pure numbers, because pure numbers tend to be session IDs that will change every page load. Names are good, ARIA labels are good, titles are good. Now you might know that the names in your app are completely random and you're not good, and they change every page load. Then you would change this. So it's a way of basically, for your application, telling Rapise, for my application, and these tests may be different, this is what's good, this is what's bad. And therefore, when you record automatically, even using the clicking recording, it actually makes it much more efficient. So a business user could still record the app, and you wouldn't have to know and teach them, well, don't do this, don't do that. It's doing it for them. So Rapise is basically intelligent recording for this specific app, what's good and what's bad. Now, the other thing would be, when you've got lots of tests that use the same, that are the same app, there's two different things you can do. One is you can, if you've updated all the objects, you can use what's called the object manager, and that lets you grab one test and grab another test, and you will copy all the objects across. The second thing you could do is you can create what are called subtests if you go to the system. So that way you have one set of subtests with the same object repository. So you can have one object repository and have multiple tests. So if you do that, like create subtests, then you don't have to have the same object repeated every single test. So that's one. So there's two different options there. One is if you have different tests, Object Manager will move the objects across and update them. If you ahead of time created a subtest, you could have chosen the option not to have their own set of objects, but they use shared objects. So that way you avoid that in the first place. So I've answered, I think, 3 or 4 different flavors of that question. You can relearn, you can use subtests. You should consider using web app profile to make the tune the recording as well, to avoid locators that change. But when an application does change, sometimes you can't get around it. It's changed so much that you have to relearn the object, in which case use the relearn function and then the object manager or subtests to propagate that.
Awesome. I want to get to another question that has to do with reporting. David asks, can you export the snapshots so that I can see them all in just one document?
Yes, it's called the what's it called? It's the the report option here. I didn't have this running. When you turn on screenshot capture, there's an option to show it in a report, and it generates an HTML page with all the screenshots in it in a narrative form. I know we have 3 minutes left. I don't know if I have time to run that right now and show you that, but there is a report option which will show you all of the tests, all the screenshots in a single HTML document. If you want to ask the next question, I can see if I can find that in Rapise from a previous run. I just don't know if we're going to run a separate one right now. So
yes.
Next question.
So there was another question here about Rapise's support of web, mobile, API, desktop, and load testing.
And here's an example of a report. I think hopefully this will. It creates an HTML report with the screenshots. Okay, no, I have to do it again. But these are the screenshots. It will create an HTML report, but I didn't tell it to do that when I did the playback in this case. So the question, sorry, what was the next question?
Can Rapise be used for web, mobile, API, desktop, and load testing?
So load testing, it's not a protocol-based load testing tool. So we have clients who use it with one, for example, like JMeter, or Octoperf, but typically Rapise is running the test through the UI. So if you wanted to test like 10 virtual users, yes, you can have Rapise using a headless browser, launch 10 sets of tests simultaneously. So it can definitely be used for that kind of basic load testing. But if you want to run 10,000 virtual users, what I would call high-level load testing or high-volume load testing, you should use a dedicated load testing tool that's going to send protocol traffic to the web server, because you really want to be load testing the server, not the client. So what we often have is clients use combination. They'll have Rapise run the test against the app whilst you're using a load generator tool like an Octoperf or a JMeter. So JMeter or Octoperf is generating load traffic directly using HTTP or HTTPS against the back end. And then what's happening is Rapise is running the same regular test on the front end. And what you're then seeing is basically how does the UI respond at the same time as when you're actually, here we go, here's Octoperf, as when you're actually running the test. So Rapise is running the test. You can see the UI. Does the UI degrade? At the same time, Octoperf or JMeter is running load against the back end. So Rapise is definitely not a load testing tool, but it can be used to help with load testing as part of the load testing.
Excellent. On that note, I think we're going to have to end the questions for today. Thank you so much, Adam, for that great presentation, as well as the Q&A. I would like to invite guests on this webinar to join us for our next webinar in the series, How to Manage Your Agile Projects with Spira Team. And that's coming up on January 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern. So again, thank you for joining. Thank you, Adam. I wish everyone a great day and appreciate your engagement.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Teresa, for
webinar.
moderating. Appreciate it. Thanks, and have a great rest of the week, and look forward to seeing you at a future webinar as well.
Awesome. Bye now.